So this is the first in a short series of videos that are going to focus in specifically on how do you search our newspaper collections. So if you want general search tips, you're going to go to our Help and Contact Us page and check out this basic searching page, which has a series of videos about doing basic searching in the website. In addition, you do have this advanced searching page that's going to provide you with more information about things like Boolean search or exact searching or wildcard searching if you want to learn about how any of that works in the database. This series is just about tips for searching our newspapers. So, if you're planning to conduct research using newspapers, a very good starting point is just to figure out what newspapers we have and which ones are going to be relevant for your research goals. So if you go to our Resource Guides tab, there's a section for newspapers. And this will give you a list of every newspaper title that we have, what the date range is for that newspaper, and any other information that you might need about where it was published, what it covered, if we know anything about the viewpoint of the publishers, that sort of thing. And so you can get a sense for which newspapers are going to be particularly useful for your research. So maybe you're going to find that you want to search across all of the newspapers. Maybe you're going to find that you just want to look in a couple of different titles of the newspapers, or a few years of the newspapers. We'll talk in future videos about how you can narrow your searches to different levels. But for right now, just think about the best strategy for you for the newspapers. Another thing to understand when you're planning your search strategy for newspapers in UPLINK is that for newspapers, the metadata in them is really minimal. It's only telling you the date of the newspaper, the title, and it's going to have a standard contextual note about the history of the newspaper as a whole. But we're not creating subject headings or descriptions for what's in the newspaper because we don't have time to read through all of the pages of every newspaper and type all of that up. So, when you're searching newspapers, you're searching the full text of the newspapers. That full-text search is created by software, not by human beings, and so it's not fully accurate. So it's really important to understand that full-text search is very powerful. It can lead you to articles about your topic that you never would have found otherwise, and it allows you to do a quick initial search of a big swath of time. Right? If you were reading through page by page on microfilm, you couldn't read every page of the newspaper for 20 years to find out if your ancestor appears in the paper. And so in the past, often genealogists would only search if they had a specific date in mind where they thought there might be an article, like an obituary or a wedding notice. But when you have full text search, you can just go ahead and do a search for your surname or the first name of an ancestor that you're looking for, and you're going to pull up a lot of other articles about them. It might not be every article that exists, but it's getting you more than you would otherwise have. On the flip side, though, if you're doing a research project where you're only looking in a short period of time, let's say maybe you're researching an event that occurred over a 2-week period, I still always really stress that it can be better to browse than to search, because with a time range like that, you can do exhaustive reading. So again, just keep in mind that if you don't get any results for a word or a name, you can't assume that that word or name is not in the newspaper. So if you want to do a completely exhaustive search for a topic, you still have to plan to just browse the issues of the newspaper in the time period that you're interested in. Another thing to think about with full-text searching is that your search terms need to be the language that was used at the time, not modern language. So if you're searching in newspapers from 1900, you need to figure out what words they used in 1900 for the thing that you're interested in. So oftentimes that's kind of an iterative research process. You try some things, maybe they're not really successful, but you find a couple of articles about your topic. You find out some words that they were using at the time to talk about your topic, and then you search using those words. In particular, a question that we get a lot is, I'm trying to find my female ancestor. Her name was Jane Smith, and I'm searching by Jane Smith and I'm not getting anything. Why is this? So before the 1970s, most women would have been referred to by Mrs., their husband's name. So if Jane Smith was married to John Smith, she's probably going to show up in the newspaper as Mrs. John Smith. So to find articles about Jane, you instead need to search for John. Just a couple more things to keep in mind in this general video. A lot of the trick with searching effectively in newspapers is to sort of go back and forth between narrow exact searches and broader searches. So I typically recommend starting with a narrow search and then going back out to a broad search if you need to, or if you're trying to do more exhaustive research. So let's use the example of searching for a name like John Smith. If you just search for John Smith across everything that we have, and I'm going to go ahead and limit to newspapers since that's what we're specifically talking about, even then you still have 86,000 results. And that's because it's set naturally to do OR searching, Boolean OR searching. Again, if you go to our advanced search page, you can learn more about what that means. And so it's pulling anything that has the word John or that has the word Smith in it. So if you want to limit that down, you have a couple of options. You can do John and Smith. That's going to pull for you any records that have both the word John and the word Smith in them. But if you're dealing with a document that's mentioning hundreds of names, it's still possible that you're getting a John someplace and a Smith someplace else, and they're not connected. The other thing that you can do is to put quotation marks around it. So John Smith in quotation marks is doing an exact search for just that phrase. And you can see that pulls it way down to only 2,200 results. But the thing that you need to know about that is that you're probably going to miss some things, because OCR will often put in a bunch of extra spaces between words, or it might miss one letter within the word, and so that probably kicked out a lot of really relevant results. So typically I'll recommend to people start by searching in quotes for the name. Probably those articles that you're looking at are going to be highly relevant to your person. Of course, with a really common name like this, there might be multiple John Smiths, so they might not all be relevant, but most of them will be, hopefully. And then you can broaden out and look for other things. Now, hopefully you have a person who has a slightly more unusual surname or first name, and so another technique that I often recommend is to search by just the more unusual name. So if you think their surname is more rare than their first name, try just the surname at first. Or you could try just the first name. And finally, when you do exact search in newspapers, the OCR knows, or the software system has been set up so that, I shouldn't say the OCR knows, of course it's not a sentient being, but it, because there are multiple columns in newspapers, the software is set up so that the words don't need to be directly next to each other in the OCR in order to count as exact search. So it's still possible when you do exact search John Smith, you might get some results that are really more of an and search. So John is appearing on one page of the newspaper and Smith is appearing on a second page. So that will happen sometimes. And I think we're going to break the video here so that it doesn't get too long. In future videos, we'll talk about how do you search within just one newspaper title versus 1 year of a paper, 1 month of a paper, and then there will be a third video about once you start actually clicking on search results, how do you navigate within the newspaper PDFs themselves, and how do you download any articles that you find that you want to keep for your research files.